Where Jesus is Buried by Wilson and Blackett, compiled by Ross Broadstock. Chapter 2: Holy Kings and Queens. For over 3 decades, Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett have avoided writing about the matter of the crucifixion of Jesus the Nazarene in around AD 35 in Jerusalem. They have also sought to avoid mention of the grave of this Jesus being in Britain, as it is described in the ancient The Song of the Graves, in order not to offend the religious susceptibilities of relatives and friends, and to Christians in general. There is, however, no point in further avoidance, and the matter needs to be openly exhibited. The fact that Jesus was also married might actually be of considerable assistance to the Church of Rome at this time. There is further evidence in Britain about the details of this alleged crucifixion in Jerusalem and how Jesus was able to survive. This also has been so far withheld in the hope that some compromise could be reached with the enemy. As this has not been possible, then the whole might as well be published, along with how the deception seems to have been carried out and why the Romans colluded with this activity before becoming violent persecutors and employing the services of Saul Paul. Jesus the Nazarene came to Britain not as a 12-year-old child with his uncle Joseph of Arimathea, as is alleged, but as a grown man of around 42 years old after he survived the crucifixion in Jerusalem. If he was born in the last years of Herod the Great, then he was born at the latest in 7 BC, and as he was crucified in AD 33, he would have been around 40 years old at the time. If after the crucifixion he had gone elsewhere, then we might never have had a problem with British ancient history, and this research to save our native British history from assassination by Rome and the London establishment would never have been necessary. The fact remains that the ancient British included the grave of this holy Lord, the Son of the Lord, who was stretched out on a plank, crucified, in their ancient records of the most illustrious persons. The fact is that the British gave Jesus the Nazarene sanctuary and safety outside the Roman Empire. There is always the very outside possibility that he died abroad and that his body was brought into Britain, but the story of him building the altar to God in Wales tends to deny that. The fact that he was probably injured in his few hours on a cross would probably have left more than scars, and these injuries would then have automatically disqualified him from continuing as a rabbi. No one could be a rabbi unless he was bodily perfect, and Jesus' religious leadership position would have been passed on. However, it is also clear that before his crucifixion, Jesus had been a rabbi, as only rabbis could preach in a synagogue or the temple, and all rabbis also had to be married, which raises the issue of offspring and descendants. The ancient British histories tell the plain truth about these descendants of the Holy Family and the foundation of Western Christianity in Britain and not in Rome, and the records locate their graves and other major relics. These records undermine the claims of priority made by the Roman Church, and they therefore shake the foundations of the splinter Church of England and the head of the Church of England, the reigning English king or queen. Edward Williams, Iolo Morganwg. Do we have here the answer for the question of why was the good name of Edward Williams, Iolo Morganwg, was so viciously attacked and slandered? Why the reputation of this clever and dedicated man, who was patently honest, so massively assaulted and smeared? The answer is that he was recording the ancient British histories that tell the plain truth about the foundation of Western Christianity in Britain and not in Rome, and he was preserving and making known the records that served to locate unwanted graves and other major relics. The policy is clear: destroy Edward Williams, Iolo Morgannwg, and so discredit and destroy almost all ancient British records. Joseph of Arimathea's grave in Cardiff. As we will see, Maelgwn of Llandaff recorded the place of the grave of Joseph of Arimathea, alias St Illyd. As Llandaff is in North Cardiff, and Maelgwn of Llandaff is almost certainly a brother of King Murig, or Maurice, the father of King Arthur too, it is plainly stupid to look for Joseph of Arimathea's tomb over 70 miles away in Glastonbury, founded in AD 941 in southern England. This Prince Maelgwn of Llandaff also precisely and accurately identified the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea in Cardiff in southeast Wales. Finding the tomb is no problem, as the directions to find it are quite clear. It is still there, and that makes more bad news for the Glastonbury fabricators. Glastonbury Abbey was founded in AD 940 and cannot possibly have anything to do with Joseph of Arimathea or either of the two King Arthurs. The records also very clearly exhibit the grave of the salved or healed god, the Son of God, and this is unmistakable. According to William of Malmesbury, the brother of King Murig, who was Maelgwn of Llandaff, referred to Jesus the prophet, and so the Cymry clearly knew all about Jesus the Nazarene. Religious antagonism. This is what underlies all the centuries of bitter antagonism and the religious wars where the Anglo-Saxons constantly attacked the Cymry, and these wars were fomented by the Church of Rome. The Cymry defended themselves and their way of life and their religion for long centuries against the tide of Roman Catholicism that sought to totally obliterate them and their very existence and record of having ever existed. This is what King Arthur is all about, and this is what the mysterious Holy Grail is all about. The Church of Rome and the English London establishment claim that all Cymric history is 100% wrong and forged, and so they consider all this hugely valuable history must be totally ignored. But the truth is that all Cymric ancient records in history are 100% correct, and if there are any liars and fabricators, then they are definitely not the British. The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail. Suffice it to say that a huge fuss was made about speculative research into the possibility of the Holy Family being the ancestors of French kings in a book, The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, in 1976. This flies in the face of well-recorded and provable history, and this theory was nothing but fantasy. The Roman and London establishments were delighted, as it served to remove all attention away from the authentic Cymric British records and the in-depth Cymric researches. A number of other get-nowhere books were published in the ensuing Fool's Rush towards the south of France. The Holy Family came to Britain, and the Holy Grail of Ark of the Covenant is in Britain, and so is the Holy Cross, and several other major artifacts, and the evidence, both written and physical, is accurate and in abundance. Clovis persecutes the Christians. After quickly being accepted in Britain in the 1st century, Christianity naturally spread into Gaul, France. Strangely, no one seems to have seen the comparison of the Frank nation arriving into northeast Gaul around AD 400, and the Church of Rome employing the military power of Clovis to make war against the apostolic Christian peoples of the rest of Gaul at the end of the 5th century AD. In return for attacking the Christians in Gaul, the Eastern Emperor, Anastasius, and the Bishop of Rome offered to make Clovis the Council of Rome in Gaul, as if the Roman Empire still existed. Clovis had married a Christian wife who had abjured from the Arian faith of her family to adopt Roman Catholicism, and matters went from there. No self respecting modern 20th and 21st century English academic would ever condescend to look for anything in Britain, and he or she most certainly would avoid Wales at all costs, and the preference is always for foreign places as far away from marvellous Britain as is possible. The defeat of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar's account of his failed invasion of Britain is somehow portrayed as a victory. The Roman poets were not fooled, however, and they wrote of how Caesar hastily turned his back and fled from the British whom he attacked. The Roman satirical poet Juvenal was particularly scathing. The Anglo-Saxon interpretation is rather like a portrayal of the German victory at Stalingrad or Napoleon's triumph at Waterloo, and Rommel's victory at El Alamein in Egypt, and Napoleon's victorious retreat from Moscow, the triumphant retreat of these other victors. This is where the fiasco begins, and where the perfectly accurate and provable histories begin to be discarded in favour of Hollywood histories fabricated by the non-British. There is a total failure to recognise hugely important links between Britain and Rome. Both nations rightly claimed a descent from the Trojans after the Trojan War of 650 BC. So there was immediately something in common between the Roman imperial hierarchy and the British monarchy. Then there are the matters of the visit of King Sinflin to Rome in the time of the first Emperor Augustus, and the recorded intermarriages between Aulus Plautius and Claudia, the sister of King Caradoc I, and then that of Rufus Pudens and Urgine, the daughter of King Caradoc I. There is also a British record of a daughter of the Emperor Claudius I, named Anna, also marrying a member of the British royal family, and there was a daughter of Claudius I named Anna from the short marriage between Claudius and Aelia Paetina of 4 months. Any descendant of these intermarriages between the Imperial Romans and the British royal family might therefore qualify as a Roman imperial descendant with a claim on the empire. The Romans were unable to penetrate into South Wales until AD 74, and in AD 80 to 81, King Bahram booted them out and very rapidly drove them clear out of Britain. Bonasus usurped the empire in Britain. There were no Romans ruling all Britain, and in AD 125, Hadrian made his celebrated diplomatic visit to the British royal family. There were no Romans ruling all Britain, and in AD 125, Hadrian made his celebrated diplomatic visit to the British royal family, which was indisputably located in southeast Wales, Esselvig, and it would have been here that Hadrian came. The key factor being that Hadrian had no children and no other immediate heirs, and his visit to Britain was made 45 years after King Bahram had kicked the Romans clear out of Britain in AD 80. The myth of a Roman Britain is covered in more detail in Arturius Rex and a future volume in this series. Caerdydd, the Castle of the Agreement. The name of what is now Cardiff is correctly in Cymric Caerdydd, and Caer means castle, and there definitely was a Cardiff castle long before Hadrian's time. And Dydd has two meanings. One is dith equals day, and the other is dith meaning agreement or in accord. And it does not matter how offended the Anglo-Saxons are by these truths and facts of life. So there was a place called the Castle of the Agreement, and medieval references and scraps and bits and pieces definitely locate the Arthurian dynasty here in Cardiff, Caerdydd. Logic demands that there was some sort of Roman and British agreement, and future events point to this concord being one where Hadrian adopted an heir from amongst this family, and probably an heir descendant of Anna, the daughter of Claudius. The entire British dynasty of some 80 successive kings of the Kingdom of Cymru is not going to disappear simply because the English establishment wants it to. Severus's wall, not Hadrian's. There was, therefore, a very solid reason for Hadrian to visit Britain, and whilst he was here, he set up a string of Roman-style forts across the north of England, from the River Tyne to the Solway Firth, and linked them with a wooden palisade fence and a ditch. This barrier was completed some 75 years later, when the Emperor Septimus Severus, resident in Britain, built a stone wall to replace the decaying timber palisade fence set up by Hadrian. It seems that even the famous wall is named after the wrong emperor. British kings equal Roman emperors. So we have an imperial line of mixed Roman and British royal blood, and the fact that the British kings match with the Roman emperors in every way should have been noticed long ago. The names are matching, and the characteristics of these kings and emperors also match. Where the king is old or young, then the emperor is old or young. A good man matches a good man. A vicious fool matches with a vicious fool. And an old short reigning man matches with his counterpart. And a successful military man or politician matches with a successful military man or politician. These are facts. When the empire was divided and there were Western emperors ruling Britain and most of Gaul, then these Western emperors can be traced back into Western Britain. When there was mayhem in the Roman Empire and some 19 usurping emperors lasted a mere 51 years in the 3rd century AD, then these were not of the British Roman bloodline, and British rule was re-established after the Emperor Constantius Chlorus came to live in Britain and married the British princess Helen, the daughter of Cole, remembered as Old King Cole of Colchester. The British Emperor, Constantine the Great. Their son was the British Christian prince Constantine the Great, who restored order to the entire Roman Empire by AD 320. Critics need to remember that the personal tutor who was appointed by the Emperor Constantius Chlorus to educate his son, the future Constantine the Great, was Lactantius, who was the leading and most celebrated Christian teacher of that age. Roman Church claims that Constantine the Great was not himself a Christian, are totally false. As stated, the easy way to demonstrate this is to draw up a simple chart showing the astonishing parallel between the lines of succession of the kings of Britain and the emperors of Rome. This can be supplemented by seeking out the historical facts of emperors like Constantius Chlorus and the all-powerful Septimus Severus, both of whom died in Britain, and the memorial stones of the Western emperors in Britain. The plain fact of Magnus Clemens Maximus being the only son of Crispus Flavius Nobilis Caesar, the eldest son of Constantine the Great by his first wife, the British Princess Minerva, should have alerted at least some of the non-Cymric academics. They have all been looking through the wrong end of a very long historical telescope and seeing historical ants that are really historical elephants. Jesus's and Mary's royal claims to Rome, Egypt, Numidia, Judea, and Britain. Into this strange heady mixture of kings and emperors, there then intrudes the matter of the Holy Family of Jerusalem. This introduces even more political and religious headaches, as there is the distinct possibility of the late Mary Magdalene being the surviving granddaughter of Mark Antony, who was the cousin of Julius Caesar and of equal descent, and Cleopatra VII, the Queen of Egypt. As a daughter of King Juba II of Numidia, she and her children would have had Roman imperial, Egyptian pharaoh, and Numidian royal claims of descent. Jesus, heir of Judea and Britain? If, as is becoming ever clearer, this very royal lady was the wife of Jesus the Nazarene, then there is a further possibility of Judean Hasmonean royal claims by any descendants. As the descendants of these two people are firmly believed and recorded as intermarrying with the linked royal bloodlines of the ancient British Cymry, these descendants would have had formidable claims in any non-republican arena. Claims to 6 thrones. This male heir is referred to as Abalak, as we will see, and he was potentially in a very powerful position. 1. He was the son of Antonia, the daughter of Claudius I, the Emperor of Rome. 2. He was a descendant of Mary Magdalene, who was a granddaughter of Mark Antony and had strong Roman hereditary claims. B. Granddaughter of Cleopatra VII and therefore the legitimate heiress of Egypt. C. Daughter of King Juba II of Numidia and also had legitimate royal claims in Numidia. 3. Abalak stroke Aphalak had direct claims on the throne of Judea by virtue of his grandfather's genealogy as exhibited in the Bible, Matthew 1:1-17. The claim to Judea was made empty and obliterated when the Emperor Hadrian finally lost all patience and demolished the temple and much of Jerusalem and expelled every Judean from Judea in AD 135. There would be no further Judean problems in the Roman Empire, as Judea had ceased to exist. Any subsequent intermarriage with members of the British royal family would make the heirs of that continuing Holy Family very dangerous to aspirants to the imperial throne in Rome. They would also be a very definite threat and an insurmountable obstacle to the business and financial ambitions of the Church of Rome. The Holy Bloodline. This brings us back to the question of the survival of a bloodline. If we take the evidence in the life of Saint Cadoc, who lived in the 6th century, and the other evidence in the genealogies prepared at the wedding of the Prince Owen, the son of HUGH, around AD 920, and other evidence as being valid, then we have some distinct possibilities. The unavoidable difficulty lies in the matter of who or which Anna married who. There seems to be 2 Annas, one of whom married King Gwyredd, George, and the other may have married the ubiquitous Abalak stroke Aphalak. Did Anna, the daughter of Claudius, and Aelia Paetina marry King Gwyredd, and Anna of the Holy Family marry Abalak? This appears to be the case. The plain fact is that this bloodline is recorded in the male line of descent that continued down through the centuries in Britain, and it resulted in the pecking order of descents known as the First Holy Family of Britain, the Second Holy Family of Britain, and the Third, the Fourth, and the Fifth. Each successive Holy Family was a branch that derived its status from a linked descent from the First Holy Family. This was usually when a daughter of the Holy Family married into another of the intertwined royal families, and then the offspring of that marriage union became another listed Holy Family. Princess Helen of the Cross. Princess Helen, the daughter of Cole, was of the Third Holy Family of Britain, and therefore her son Constantine the Great was a descendant of the Holy Family. He was not a Roman Catholic, but he was an apostolic British Christian, and his religious beliefs would have been British apostolic, and they would not have been the same as those of Rome. Roman backlash. Whether the existence of this family in Britain had anything at all to do with the decision of Claudius I to invade southeastern Britain in AD 42 is conjecture. Whether or not the desperate flying campaign into enemy British territory that was made by Paulinus in his attack on a family group in Anglesey during Nero's reign was made to try to eliminate a particular religious group from Judea is not clear. The ancient order of the British Druids wore white, and the second rank wore green, and the third rank wore blue, but the family group that was attacked in Anglesey wore black, and that is strange. The fact remains that Elisna, the son of Ner, or the Holy Lord God, the son of the Lord God, has a grave in Wales, and it is recorded in the Song of the Graves. This site is clearly described and it is traceable. Alan Wilson and Baran Blackett have held back on publishing anything of this for 20 years or more, and they have even attempted to draw attention away from it. The complete intransigence and the dirty trick campaigns of their enemies, who are also the enemies of the British nation, which they are steadily dismantling, have finally made it necessary to publish these truths. The publishing of the accurate actual entries in the Song of the Graves marks a beginning, and the crass ignorance, or alternatively, the extreme duplicity of the Reverend Robert Williams in his attempt to disfigure the national heritage will be made clear. Notable early Western Christians and events. Linus, the son of King Caradoc I of Britain, was the first bishop of Rome in AD 51. There is no evidence of Peter ever being in Rome. Linus and other early British Christians are sent blessings by Timothy at the end of his second letter, which is included in the Bible. Constantine the Great was also a Christian, as his father, the Emperor Constantius Chlorus, employed Lactantius, the leading Christian scholar of that era, to be the personal tutor of young Constantine, who later became styled as the Great. The ridiculous claim made by the Bishop of Rome that the Emperor Constantine the Great left Rome and the Western Empire and church to the bishops of Rome in his will, known as the Decretals of Constantine, was a total forgery. The Empress Helen, the mother of Constantine the Great, was a leading British noblewoman and not the barmaid daughter of a Yugoslavian innkeeper, as claimed 1,000 years later by incredible Roman Catholic priests. The Holy Cross was brought from Jerusalem into West Wales by the Empress Helen of the Cross in AD 326, and it is still there. Metal detection supports this. British Apostolic Christianity spread from Britain to Gaul, and the Bishop of Rome persuaded King Clovis of the Franks to start the first crusade to annihilate these British-style Christians in Gaul in AD 505. Austin, later Augustine, introduced the Roman brand of Christianity to the immigrant Saxons and Angles in eastern Britain 562 years later in AD 597. Austin stirred up religious hatred wars against the apostolic Christians in Western Britain in this second crusade in exactly the same manner as happened in Gaul. No bishop of Rome ever claimed the title of Papa or Pope before AD 627. Any claim to have done this earlier is yet another falsehood. There is overwhelming evidence of the strong existence of apostolic Christianity in England and Wales many centuries before Austin brought religious strife and race hatred into Britain in 597 AD. The contest. The contest is between the most authentic, the best, and the most copiously recorded, and the most certainly provable history in Europe, the history of the British people, and that is in particular the history of the British Cymric nation and their dedicated opponents, the Roman Church, who have no real evidence of any kind whatsoever. On the British side, there is evidence in abundance. On the side of the Roman Church, there is no real evidence, only speculative beliefs. The First Crusades against Europe and Britain. The terror of the extreme cruelty and brutality of the Church of Rome through the evil of the Inquisition was everywhere, and persecution of any other style of Christianity began in AD 506, when the Bishop of Rome offered to make Clovis the Frank the consul of Gaul if Clovis made war against the apostolic British-style Christians who proliferated in Gaul. This was the first real crusade. This spreading of the gospel by the sword continued with further crusades, and the Emperor Charlemagne is famous for offering the Saxons in Europe the alternative of either accepting Roman Catholicism or death. Summary of the birth of Western Apostolic Christianity. Western Apostolic Christianity was founded in Britain in AD 35 to 37, when the Holy Family arrived in Cymric, Wales. This is recorded as the last year of Tiberius. Tiberius being Tiberius Claudius Nero Caesar, the Roman emperor who died in AD 36 to 37. The Roman year started on a different date, several months from our 1st of January. It was taken from Britain to Rome in AD 51, when the British Christian king Caradoc was betrayed and taken to Rome as a captive to make his famous speech before Claudius, his wife, and the Senate. Caradoc spent 7 years in Rome before being released back to Britain on the agreement that he would not fight again. This was well before Saul Paul arrived in Rome during the reign of Nero. The British-style Christianity also spread from Britain into Gaul. Bran was a great-grandson of King Caradoc I and a son of Ladieth, a son of Caradoc II. It was Caradoc I who spent 7 years in Rome from AD 51 to 58. The chaplain of the young Bran was St. Illyd, i.e. Joseph of Arimathea. The site of Bran's manor house is at Trevran, and the church of St. Illyd stands near to it. The ancient preaching circle core is still there. Western Christianity, having started in Britain rather than Rome, is the main cause of this centuries-long deliberate campaign to destroy and eradicate all of our provably very accurate and invaluable British histories. This simple and undeniable fact obviously poses a huge threat to the bogus claims of Rome to be the primary Christian church. If this Holy Family that fled from Jerusalem in AD 35 had gone elsewhere, instead of coming to their ancient kinsmen in Britain outside the Roman Empire, then it is quite possible that there would have been no onslaught against our national heritage and our ancient culture that is enshrined in our very accurate British histories. This is the matter that will be dealt with extensively in this volume. The Church of England is simply a breakaway branch of the Church of Rome, and therefore it is equally threatened by the fact that the Western Cymric Church is the true original Western Christian Church. Mass media used to destroy British history. When printing began and the production techniques continually improved, there was also an ever-growing need to educate ordinary folk so that they could work efficiently in the factories and offices that were constantly improving technically. As these folk became more literate and prosperous, the danger to the religionists was that the truth held in our native British histories would become more widely known. In the 20th century, with the ability to read and with more general wealth, folk travelling and communicating through films, radio, and finally through television, and the marvel of the internet, the situation altered radically. Books that were very rare items 500 years before became progressively cheaper and more available, and this finally resulted in the modern paperback editions that made literature available to everyone. To counter this, a massive onslaught was launched against all ancient British history in order to suppress the truths and the huge quantity of evidence that is available. This is what has happened, and this is why the 9 books published to date by Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett have also been suppressed. The main obstacle to any clear exhibition of accurate British history remains the same as it always has been, and that is the overblown pride of the Anglo-Saxon in England. Remarkably, only a minority of the English are Anglo or Saxon descended, and nothing could be more misleading than absurd political statements about Anglo-American or Anglo-Irish agreements and so on. Just who these Anglos are is not clear in any sense of the word. We all know who the British are. All the many literary diversions and misdirection into the south of France and speculations about long-haired Merovingian kings and alleged treasures of the Templar Knights hidden in Scots myths are without foundation. They are, however, a very useful source of propaganda for the churches of Rome and England, and these wild goose chases serve to divert attention away from the reality of accurate, authentic, ancient British history preserved in Western Britain. The Glastonbury fraud. Here is the obvious, desperate reason for the huge, hilarious, and scandalous fraud of Glastonbury Abbey in AD 1190 at Somerset, England. This abbey is in very clearly the totally wrong place for the tomb of King Arthur II, and when the very clear directional evidence in the Perlesval manuscript is followed, there is a trail that leads incontestably directly from Nash Point to the Mynydd y Gaer in Glamorgan. The later Glastonbury Abbey, built in AD 941, is a historical and religious farce and a hoax of gigantic magnitude. Glastonbury Abbey in Somerset was not founded until AD 940, and the first abbot was St Dunstan in AD 941, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with either King Arthur I, son of Magnus Maximus, who died circa AD 400, or Arthur II, son of King Murig/Maurice, who died in AD 579. Joseph of Arimathea died in the 1st century AD, was not buried in Glastonbury Abbey founded in AD 941, and instead his grave is very clearly described by Maelgwn of Llandaff, who lived in southeast Wales in the early years of the 6th century AD. Every other investigation into the royal and noble ancient genealogies of Old Britain has constantly been shown to be accurate, and there is no reason to doubt this prominent genealogy as presented in the Harleian manuscript 3859 and in several other sources. The English establishment and the Roman Church will probably continue their centuries-long protests against the historical evidence, the facts, and the truth, as religion is a very profitable business enterprise, as it always has been, and so also is outdated monarchy. The story of Joseph of Arimathea and King Arthur having been buried at Glastonbury was supposedly created at the suggestion of a king to help pay for the restoration of the roof that had burned down. The pattern appears to be 1. Make a guess, often wild. 2. Assemble whatever is available to support the guess. 3. Proclaim the guess to be fact. 4. Get the guess widely published. This gets nowhere, but it serves to mislead the public and make money in book sales and television programs. There is, in fact, a very promising way to track down the Templar treasures. This, as it has been presented, is the evidence as it stands in the British Cymric Welsh records. And here we have the obvious reason for the tremendous onslaught on our native British heritage, culture, and history. The fact is that the Holy Family from Jerusalem came into Britain as refugees to ancient Israel, 10 tribes kinsmen. Jesus the Nazarene was either killed on a cross in Jerusalem and then he was resurrected, or he escaped death on the cross. Either way, he afterwards came into Britain. The descendant named as Abimelech would have carried huge hereditary claims, and this is the problem. The question is, who is telling the truth and who is telling lies? We, the British, have evidence, evidence, and evidence, and the Roman Church and the London establishment has what it calls faith.